So we're now live on YouTube. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Government Oversight Committee. I'll start with a couple of sort of housekeeping matters. This meeting is being broadcast on the Government Oversight Committee's YouTube channel. The audio stream is also being broadcast on the legislature's website. The legislature's audio stream is turned on at the scheduled start of the meeting and will remain on for the duration of our meeting. The YouTube stream is on now and will also stay on for the duration of our meeting, including during breaks. Please remember to mute yourself when you're not speaking. And I think we've covered the rest of the ground rules plenty of times by now, so folks are familiar with our process. Written materials for this meeting have been mailed or distributed electronically to committee members and have been posted on the OPEGA website at the start of the meeting. So the public may go on to the OPEGA website, navigate to GOC meetings, and you'll find all of our materials for today's meeting and past meetings there. During the meeting, the chair or the co-chairs will recognize committee members, staff, or others to participate. Members may get the attention of the chairs by either waving your physical hand, using the raise hand function, or making a request in the chat box in Zoom. Please remember the chat function in Zoom is really reserved for technical issues. That's not a place for substantive debate or conversation on matters before us. So with that out of the way, we'll continue on with introductions of committee members, and we'll begin with Senator Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Donna Bailey, and I represent Senate District 31, which is Saco, Old Orchard Beach, Hollis, Leamington, and part of Buxton.
Thank you. And Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Senator Libby. My name is Rick Bennett. I have the honor of serving 13 towns in Western Maine, the foothills and lakes region of the beautiful parts of Oxford and Cumberland counties.
Thank you. Representative Dillingham.
Good morning. I represent House District 72. It's comprised of the towns of Oxford, Otisfield, and Mechanic Falls.
Thank you. Representative Arata.
Good morning. My name is Amy Arata, and I represent House District 65, which includes New Gloucester and part of Poland.
Thank you. Representative Millett.
Good morning. I'm Soren Millett. I represent House District 71, including the citizens of Norway, Sweden, Waterford, and Wood Parish.
Thank you. Representative O'Neill.
Good morning. My name is Maggie O'Neill, and I'm here representing House District 15, which is in Parco.
Thank you. And our co-chair, Representative McDonald.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Genevieve McDonald. I represent House District 134, which is the offshore islands of Penobscot Bay and Western Frenchman's Bay.
Thank you. And I am Nate Libby. I proudly represent all of the people of Lewiston in the Maine Senate and serve as Senate Chair. We're also joined by OPEGA staff this morning, Lucia Nixon, who is the director of OPEGA, Etta Connors, who is our clerk for the committee, Amy Gagne, Matt Kruk, Scott Farwell. Those are the folks I see. They are analysts with OPEGA, so we welcome you all this morning. Just as a note for the public, I learned this morning that the AFA committee was meeting late into the night and are going to continue their deliberations this morning. So if you see members of the committee popping out, it's not for lack of interest, but balancing multiple priorities. And we all I think, appreciate their long hours and their efforts on that. So with that, we'll move to our agenda. Number one is a summary of the June 4th, 2021 GOC meeting. As a reminder, there's no vote required on this, but are there any comments or edits from any of the committee members on those minutes? Seeing none, we'll move on to new business. The first item we have is a presentation of the OPEGA report on Maine Citizens Initiative and People's Veto Process. That report was mailed to committee members last week. Typically how we go through these reports is we'll have Lucia present summary findings of their report. We have some folks in the waiting room from the different agencies that are involved in oversight and how citizen initiative and people's veto processes are conducted. So if there's no objection, I think first we'll hear the presentation from Lucia, and then we can move on to comments or questions from the committee. And if the committee is interested, we can invite folks from the agencies to answer questions for us. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lucia.
Thank you very much. I am going to share my screen. Just 1 second. Can everybody see that? Is that a good?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. All right. So welcome to our presentation on OPEGA's report on the Maine Citizen Initiative and People's Veto process, with a focus on trends in activity and characteristics and opportunities for improvement. Here's a little roadmap for how we're going to walk through the presentation today. First, I'll give you a refresher on what the scope questions were that the GOC asked OPEGA to look at, briefly discuss the data and methods that OPEGA used. We will provide some background overview information about the Citizen Initiative and People's Veto process, and then move into the substance of the report, looking at trends and characteristics that we found and opportunities for improvement. And as Senator Libby said, you should all have received copies of the report. It is also being posted to the website today, consistent with our policies on public release. I would like to note that this project is a long time coming. It had started back in, got the attention of the GOC in 2017. The actual scope questions were approved in 2018. And I guess unfortunately for its sake, it kept put on the back burner as more emergent and urgent issues took precedence and priority. So it's had a few fits and starts, but we're happy to bring it to the finish line today. And I'd also like to thank, I think probably everyone on the OPEGA staff has contributed at some point to this project. So it has been through lots of contributions. And I do have Matt Crook and Scott Farwell here with me today, who have worked closely on the project throughout and are available to assist me as the subject matter experts. So starting with the questions, as I noted briefly, this issue came to the GOC's attention in 2017 surrounding at the time of the York County Casino referendum. And there was some GOC interest, not only in that referendum, but also in the citizen initiative process more broadly. And so the GOC asked OPEGA to hold a public hearing at that time, and then to move forward and have a broad scope look at the process of the citizen initiative and people's veto, with the idea that this would provide legislators with a reference point for their continued legislative work related to these processes. These are perennial issues in the public and in the legislature about how the state goes through the referendum process. So in summary, there were 5 scope questions. They really fell into 2 categories as we were doing our work. So the first broad category is trends and characteristics. And this is really painting a picture, a descriptive picture of how citizens' initiatives and people's vetoes have been over time. We used a 20-year historical period for this review. And then within those trends and characteristics, we did a whole host of things, which I'll quickly review, but also there were 2 particular items that the GOC wanted to make sure that we looked at. So one of those is the geographic distribution of signatures, and the other is a question of whether these are issues that have previously been before the legislature. So those 2 questions will be answered along with a broad set of trends and characteristics. And then the second group of scope questions is opportunities for improvement. So the GOC asked OPEGA to look at what are the opportunities to improve the process. And there were 5 attributes that were grouped into 2 questions. So efficiency, effectiveness, economical use of resources were captured in question 4, And then accountability and transparency were counted in question 5. To answer these questions, OPEGA used a wide range of data and research methods. So for data, we went to the Secretary of State and the Maine Commission on Governmental Ethics and Election Practices. You'll hear more about them as we go along, but they're the holders of multiple sets of data that are relevant to these processes. OPEGA also conducted a broad range of interviews with people engaged in the process, from the Secretary of State, the Ethics Commission, Attorney General's office, some of the nonpartisan legislative offices, as well as at the more local level, the municipal registrars and some notaries public. OPEGA also spoke to representatives of the committees that finance these campaigns, and we'll get into details of what those are. They're called ballot question committees, and then what you're more familiar with probably are political action committees. And then to round it out, OPEGA did background research looking at laws and the state constitution, and also looked a bit at initiative processes in other states as necessary. At a very high level, the process for the citizens initiative and people's veto is guided by Constitution and related state laws and involves multiple steps and multiple agencies, but the primary two are the Secretary of State, and within that, the Elections Division of the Bureau of Corporations, Elections and Commission. And it's the Secretary of State's office that administers all the processes related to getting initiative or a people's veto from the application that comes in from a Maine citizen all the way to the ballot. And so they handle a lot of the administrative processes. And then the other side, we have the Maine Commission on Governmental Ethics and Election Practices. And as this is a state agency that administers all campaign finance related matters, it takes on that role also with respect to these campaigns. And so it manages registration, reporting, and data related to the financing of these initiatives and vetoes. Looking a little bit more at the Secretary of State or getting from application to ballot, here's a little flow chart that hopefully illustrates for you some of the key steps we were able to group. It's a very detailed and lengthy process, so we tried to group it out for you. The first step is applying to the Secretary of State and having they review, the SOS reviews that application. There's certain application requirements, and the next, there has to be 5 registered voters plus the lead applicant when the application comes in, and the initiative must have a full text of the law. A people's veto does not. There's a whole host of varying details about timing and content, but suffice it to say that with the Secretary of State's reviews everything that comes in to see that it meets it. And if the requirements are met, they issue what's called a petition. And this is when then it turns into the step of circulating the petition and gathering signatures, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with that. And we will talk a bit more about signature gathering as we get into some of the opportunities for improvement. I would just note that once the signatures are gathered, there's a process for the circulators to take oaths regarding their part in the process, that they've met the requirements. And then there's a certification at the municipal registrar certifying the signatures that were turned in from that municipality. And then that whole package goes up to the Secretary of State. So the campaign will bring all the petitions together and submit them in a bundle to the Secretary of State. And the Secretary of State has 30 days. And as noted in the second part of this chart, there needs to be valid signatures in the number of 10% of votes for governor at the last gubernatorial election. And that's in the 60,000s ballpark at the moment. And so, like I said, they have a 30-day window. There's a detailed process that they then go through. And if you want a reference, it's page 7 of the report. And they go through a multi-step process to certify the signatures and determine validity. And then they issue a determination letter. So let's assume that it is certified as valid. Then a people's veto automatically will go on the ballot, and a citizens initiative then goes over to the legislature, which is our next stop. And the legislature can either enact it as submitted, which takes away the need for a referendum. The legislature can also not enact it, and the legislature could also propose a competing measure to set aside the question at referendum. So in any case that the original one submitted is not inactive, the governor, at the session to which it was submitted, the governor is required to issue a proclamation to refer it to the voters. And then we get finally to the ballot. There's a ballot question drafting process with the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State provides a citizen's guide. And then, alas, we get to the referendum vote. On the campaign finance side of things, there's also multiple steps. First is registration, and this is required when the involved committees, the political action committee and the ballot question committees, when they reach certain thresholds of spending. And a ballot question committee is slightly different. A PAC is formed for the purpose of influencing an election campaign, and a ballot question committee is a little narrower. It falls outside of some of the requirements of PACs, and it does not take any steps related to candidate elections, but it intends to initiate or influence ballot questions. So those are the two types of bodies that can be organizing and funding these campaigns. So they must register with the commission, and we'll come back to that a little bit later in the presentation. And then once they start spending, there's a series of reporting requirements that come into play. There's initial reports, quarterly reports, and then there's election-based reports that happen at certain time points before and leading up to elections and so forth. Representative O'Neill? You're muted. Is she okay? Yeah. As the reports come in, the commission staff review them for completeness and compliance and follow up, take any follow-up actions, and they post the data on their website. So this will move us into the trends and characteristics. And again, the idea is to paint a broad picture to give the legislature a sense of what's been going on. Again, we looked at a 20-year period from 1999 to 2018. And overall, the numbers here will show you the frequency of which there were citizens initiative and people's vetoes. The applications come in, and from those, then a certain number actually end up having petitions issued. From that, the petitions go out for signature collection and circulation, and then come back, and a portion of those get certified. Now, not every petition that's issued is submitted back. Sometimes the multiple applications may also come in at a certain time related to the same initiative. So it doesn't mean there was 135 unique efforts. It says that there was 135 applications. Sometimes applicants are known to put in multiple applications and then just proceed with one of them to moving that one towards the finish line. So of the 29 citizens initiatives that were certified by the Secretary of State, 2 of them were directly enacted by the legislature, and the other 27 were voted on by the voters at referendum, and 11 of the 27 passed. The people's veto happens clearly less frequently. In the end, there were 6 that were certified over the 20 years, and they all went straight to the ballot, and 5 of the 6 passed. So that's just to give you a really big picture level of activity that's been going on. And you can see in the report, there is a table that breaks it out by year and shows that the activity that happened year by year. I'd have to look up the table number, but it's in the report, and it does give you it's table 3. So you can see that for the citizens initiatives, there was activity in every year that we looked at. Moving along, we also looked at what are the subject matters of the petitions, and I just wanted to highlight where we found common themes. So for the citizens initiative, we found 5 subjects that appeared repeatedly and accounted for a majority of the 93 petitions. And we were looking at the petition level. So there were taxation, marijuana, gambling, various health and medical issues, and natural resources. Senator Bailey?
Lucia, if we could pause, Senator
Yes.
Bailey has asked a question.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first of all, would you like us to hold our questions or to ask them as they come up in the subject matter that Lucia is going over?
I have no strong preference. If you've got a question that you feel is timely, please proceed.
All right, thank you. So it is about this chart and trends. And I noticed in reading the report that you didn't differentiate between initiatives that are required by statute and those that are, purely just initiatives. So for example, the gambling, as you know, that is required by statute, that it has to go out to referendum since 2011. So I'm just wondering, was that a conscious decision to not kind of break those out? And other than gambling, are you aware of other statutes that require a certain subject matter to go out to referendum? And I guess within the gambling, of those 12, how many have been since 2011, when again, it was required by statute to go up by referendum?
Yeah, those are great questions. Thank you. So I am going to turn to Matt for the question on looking at the data and the decision-making around looking at those required by statute or not. You are correct. We did not, the report does not delineate between those that were required by statute. And if we can't answer this question immediately, I know we could get back to you later today with some details on the 12 that were the 12 gambling ones. If you have anything to add.
You're correct. That wasn't a conscious decision on our part, but that is something that I can certainly pull out for you. We don't have those specific casino related ones after 2011. We were wondering how many of those there were in that subset. I just want to make sure I had this right.
Yes, only because, I think when we're looking at trends, that for me, at least, there's a difference between initiatives that were put out to a referendum because they're required by statute and those that are not required by statute. And the gambling, it was curious to me that, Lucia, you said that this was kind of initiated by the York County Casino referendum. So what prompted this was, again, an initiative that was required by statute. So that's something that the legislature enacted. And I guess I'm kind of curious at the interplay between statutes being passed requiring things to go out to referendum and the potential impact on, again, trends and characteristics of referendums. So, thank you.
Sure.
And I'll work on that.
Thank you. On the people's veto, you'll see there's obviously far fewer, and the subject matter, there were smaller groups, but out of the 13, we did identify 3 that had appeared multiple times, and those were civil rights related to same-sex marriage and immigration, and then vetoes of portions of state budget measures, and then 2 on election practices. So the next slide just shows you the frequency or the shift from submitted to certified. So of the 6 people's vetoes that were submitted to the Secretary of State, 6 were certified, and 29 of the 32 citizens initiatives. Another question that came up of interest was potentially looking at geographic distribution of signatures. And what we were able to do is, beginning in 2006, from 2006 to 2018, we were able to obtain data that had master lists that provided information on the location of signatures by petition and municipality. So from that, we were able to break that down further. And for that analysis, we decided to use the congressional district geographic split. There have been bills in the last couple of legislatures proposing a geographic distribution requirement for the collection of signatures. And so it's been a topic of discussion. Some other states do have some geographic requirements. And we decided to use the congressional district for our analysis because it appeared to be the most practical option and also the most likely to withstand any court challenge. So we looked at the reliance of different areas of the state. And it was interesting. One of the interesting things that we found was a clear break in the data. So throughout, there was more reliance on getting signatures from Congressional District 1, but that increased over time. So for the first 14 initiatives for which we had data from 2006 to 2011 for this part of the analysis, 9 of them had more than half the signatures from CD1, and 1 of them had more than 2/3 of the signatures from CD1. And then in the last 8 years that we looked at, there were 12, and all 12 of them had more than half of the signatures from CD1, and 8 of them had more than 2/3 of the signatures from CD1. So that was sort of an interesting note. And we do have, I just should have probably mentioned this earlier, but Appendix A of the report provides a detailed data summary for the citizens' initiatives and people's vetoes that were certified as valid. And so for those 6 people's vetoes are at the top, it's on page 35 of the report. And then below that, the 29 citizens' initiatives, you can see the result, the total votes, percent in favor by district, percent of signatures by district, and spending and support and opposition. So if you're interested in looking a little bit more at the geographic question, there is more data there. But to keep us moving, I'm going to shift over to what happens once a citizens initiative ends up at the legislature. So for the citizens initiative, there were 25 certified. They all got sent to the legislature and they got an LD number, an initiated bill number, and were printed. So as I mentioned earlier, what can happen from that point forward is it is possible for the legislature to enact it as written. That happened 2 of the 29 times. The other 27 went out to referendum. And there were 19 that were referred to a legislative committee. And that is something we did just want to note in the sense that that was something that sort of happened more frequently in the earlier part of our data and then seemed to happen quite a bit less. So in the first 18 of the 19, the first of these 29, if you pick the first 19, 18 of those were referred to a committee. And then when you went forward, it was only 1 of the last 11 was referred to committee. And then there was a new law passed by the legislature in the 129th that required initiated bills to have a public hearing before a legislative committee, although there is a process in that to have that waived by the House and the Senate. So I don't know how that was related, but it was an interesting thing we saw. Like it had happened, it went to committee, and then it didn't, and then there was a law. Another question that was of interest is, are these issues matters that, how are these relate to matters previously before the legislature? So what is the connection that these citizens initiatives have? And So we looked thoroughly at the content and identified that 86% of the certified citizens initiatives had been previously before the legislature, and all but 2 of those issues had been before the legislature within the previous 2 biennia or 4 years. And the 4 that were not, we identified as not previously before the legislature. 2 were taxation related measures that were very specific tax limitations. So we certainly noted that taxation is obviously always before the legislature, but these specific proposals regarding tax limits had not come before the legislature. And then there were 2, again, gambling is frequently before the legislature, but there were 2 slot machine proposals that, due to their specificity, we classified as not having been previously before the legislature. Turning now to the expenditure side of it and funding of these initiatives, we just wanted to note, as we took a broad look at this, our analysis was based on direct expenditures on goods and services by the committees, by the BQCs and the PACs. We will talk more about, there's some nuances in how the data is reported that's a little bit different than direct expenditures. So we'll get back to that. But we wanted to note, first of all, that there's a very substantial range of spending on these initiatives, and also that the amount of spending, including the amount spent on one side of the issue, does not seem to always align with the outcome. So first of all, we just put forward for you to look at the lowest 2 amounts of spending and the highest 2. So it happens that 2 of the lowest 2 were both in 2009, as was one of the highest expenditures. And then the York County one that sort of led to this discussion was also the very highest expenditure. And we found that the higher proportion of spending in support or on the other side in opposition does not ensure the passage or defeat. And we have some more details in the report. There's a table, if you're interested in more details, that will show you the how the percentage of signatures aligns with the final outcome. And that we looked at all of the initiatives that spent more than $2 million and found that I think in 6 of those 9, there was an opposite result than might have been expected. So if there was, 92% of the expenditure was in support, and still the measure failed at the polls. So we just noted that as a point of interest.
Lucia, I see Senator Bennett has his hand
Sure.
raised.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Lucia. This is really interesting stuff. Just a question. Why, since the report's being issued this month, why not add 2020 into the mix? Because as we know, there was spending on a referendum that was removed from the ballot that exceeded the high number that you're showing on that chart.
Sure. So the reason for that is that all the work that went into this report was, it was scoped out and it was completed. And I think it is definitely of interest what happened in 2020. And it was the point we were at in the analysis. We certainly could provide some additional information. And so I don't have a specifically good reason other than the project was framed to look at these years. And I do think that adding some information about the important, and there have been important developments both legislatively and at the ballot, certainly all the CMP related initiatives. And I was going to mention a few things at the end, but for the point of the data analysis. Yeah.
I'll defer then because I think it is added on. But can I just ask another question, Mr. Chairman? I missed the 2011 event that Senator Bailey referred to with respect to requiring referendum related to gambling to go or gambling measures to go to the public. At some point, I'd like to learn a little bit more about that. I think it was during my Rip Van Winkle period of snooze.
Sure, we can follow up with you on that. Yeah,
Thank
that
you.
is interesting. So that wraps up sort of this. Again, it's a very high level. In the interest of time, there's lots more details and data in the report, and we're happy to follow up with questions that you may have. For the purposes of today, wanted to just sort of give you a really high level overview and hopefully spark your interest in looking further into some of the issues that are of that you particularly note. So this shifts us into the second aspect of our project that OPEGA conducted, which were scope questions 4 and 5, which is what opportunities exist to improve efficiency, effectiveness, economic use of resources, transparency, and accountability in the citizen initiative and people's veto process. And before we get into that, I just want to talk a little bit about terminology. So in OPEGA's work, we often report on what we call our issues, and it has a very specific definition, which is an issue in our work is a situation where what we find is occurring does not meet some established criteria of what should be occurring. So then we identify that as an issue, identify what the gap is, and provide a recommendation for bridging that gap. This ask that we were given was to do a broader view of what are some opportunities for how we could improve it. So we weren't necessarily measuring against some criteria, whether it was being met or not. However, we were doing a wider span of looking at what is happening and could it be improved. And so we wanted to note that distinction. And also that there's going to be inherent trade-offs between these 5 attributes. So something that you might do to improve efficiency, could lower transparency. And so that's we want to kind of start with that framework. And also note that while for issues where something's clearly not meeting an established standard or requirement, OPEGA will posit a recommendation to get from A to B. Here, we are putting forth potential opportunities. So potential recommendations. If you want to do X, you could pursue this. You might want to think about the impact on Y. So we just wanted to sort of clarify that up front if it seems a little different than some of our more traditional reports. We did have one identified issue in this report that came through our work. And that is that we identified that there is not an established procedure governing how the Secretary of State conducts signature validation when there is more than one submission of petitions for a single initiative or veto attempt. So this does not happen very often, but there have been instances when a citizen's initiative, the York County Casino, again, going back to that, there was a situation where they went out for signatures in a round 1, they brought back 91,000 submitted signatures. Those went to the Secretary of State for certification. The Secretary of State found that there was a maximum of 35,518 valid signatures. So clearly not meeting the 61,000 that was required. And the footnote of it being maximum was that they didn't go down the road to some of the final checks for invalid because it was already clearly so far below. So then they still had time. There's an 18-month window from the issuance of the petition to submit the valid signatures. So they went back out and did another round of signature gathering and got nearly 65,000 signatures. And those were submitted to the Secretary of State. And of those, they found nearly 53,000 were valid. So at that time, what was done was to add the valid signatures from the two batches and there got you to over 87,000, which was clearly well above the 61,000. And this then moved this forward to the ballot. The issue that we identify is that the second set of signatures happened at a later period of time, and there was not a process in place to check for duplicates between round 2 and round 1. And we just note that as a potential risk, that there could have been duplicates between round 2 and round 1. Here, there was clearly a high number by which it surpassed the threshold requirement, but we wanted to note that and that we did make a recommendation that that there be a process to update the signature validation process and procedures to ensure that multiple submissions and rounds are checked against one another, not just the internal check.
Representative Dillingham.
Thank you. So Lucia, I just want to verify what you're saying is that they do not have any sort of system set up to verify between different submissions of different rounds of collections to make sure the same people are not signing in both?
Correct.
So, okay, thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to shift over to the opportunities for improvement that I was talking about, where we looked across those 5 attributes and tried to present them in a fairly similar format. So we'll go through for each what the attributes we saw could be improved, what part of the process we're looking at, how it could be improved, and what agency was involved. So for the first one, we identified an opportunity to improve transparency and accountability in signature collection process through the identification and reporting of all individuals participating in that process. And that would be reporting that to the Secretary of State. So under the state constitution and related laws, petitions currently may be circulated by a Maine resident who is a registered voter. So other individuals aren't prohibited from participating in petition or signature collection effort, but the circulation role is assigned specifically to residents who are registered voters. And currently the state has relatively little information about the phenomenon, which I'm sure people have heard of and are familiar with, of out-of-state paid signature gatherers, beyond what is reported to the Secretary of State by their parent petition organization. And that information that was filed with the petition organization registration, we found not very useful and helpful to really get an idea of the extent and more details. So again, this is an area where if the state wanted more clarity and transparency about the paid signature gathering part of it, which we had heard come up, there is an opportunity to potentially require some additional disclosures and for petition circulators and the organizations regarding the individuals they're hired and what role they have in the efforts. We did note that there is current litigation ongoing right now, a lawsuit against the state to prohibit the enforcement of laws that regulate, that require the residency requirement and the voter registration requirement. And the district court did rule that those requirements violated the right to political speech. And currently the Secretary of State has filed an appeal. So this is ongoing litigation. And we just wanted to note that related to the issue of paid signature gathering. The second area where we saw an opportunity for improvement was again related to signature collection. This is that there is right now, there are requirements related to how signatures are to be collected, things you can and can't be paid for, that petitions can't be left unattended, and they can't be attended by someone other than the circulator, that the circulators must witness each signature. So there are a series of requirements, but we did not see any specific mechanism for reporting or investigating violations of those requirements. So we just wanted to note that the Secretary of State relies on the later down the road in the validation of signatures to identify potential issues in the whole signature process. But we just noted that there really isn't a place for someone a channel set up for someone to report on this if there was suspected violations We did also, again, there's these trade-off issues, is that there would be need for staffing to manage that reporting process and investigate and follow up. And there would need to be, and also people might report things that weren't violations, but we did just want to note that as something that we observed. The third is the opportunity to improve efficiency in signature validation through the implementation and use of a fully functioning central voter registration system. So that's an electronic system. And to have that fully used by municipal registrars and the Secretary of State. So as I talked early on, and then again, sort of in talking about some of the more details, the process for validating signatures and certifying petitions, it relies on the municipal registrars to do a whole batch of work, and then relies on the Secretary of State to take what comes in for the registrars and go through a detailed process before they certify the petitions and determine the number of valid signatures. There is a table in the report. I believe it's table 2 on page, let me see, page 7, for those who want to look at what the multiple steps are at the Secretary of State's. And there's multiple things they check for, one of them being duplicates, which is something that came up before. And then there's other irregularities that they need to check for. This is a very intensive process. And right now it's very manually intensive. And the Secretary of State has 30 days to certify the petition. And if they don't certify it, it goes to the ballot. So there's this, and they may get multiple efforts come in at the same time. And the way that it's done now, there's manual data entry, there's review of hard copy printouts, there's manual comparison of signatures and voter registrations. And so we identified opportunity if they were able to move to a central voter registration system, which would be an electronic database, there's a potential to eliminate a lot of the manual parts of this process that happen now. And the Secretary of State does have a central voter registration system, and there is a module related that would provide some of this functionality, but they have not had the resources to implement. And they noted to us that the entire CVR is due for an update. And so that's something to take into account, whether to put in work to upgrade a part of a system that the entire system is going to be updated. And then also just to consider the impacts on the municipalities, only some of which currently use the CVR. Senator Libby?
Lucia, at the top of the chart, the first step in the certification process is checking for duplicate signatures. So related to Representative Dillingham's question earlier, we're talking about two different scenarios. Most citizen initiatives go through one signature certification process. But in the case of the York County Casino, am I to understand that was a unique case where they failed to gather signatures the first time? They went out for a second round of signatures, and OPEGA has identified that there is no process to check for duplicate signatures between those two batches. Is that? Did I restate that correctly?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
So there is a duplicate signature review process for most, but in the instance of two batches, there is not. Okay.
Exactly. So there's
Thank
a
you.
thorough duplicate process within a submission that goes to the Secretary of State. The complicating factor was that one situation where they were separated by a significant amount of time.
Thank you.
Mhm. Fourth, we have an opportunity to improve the transparency and effectiveness of data on the organizers of petition circulation at the beginning of that effort through better communication between the Secretary of State and the Ethics Commission. So we're shifting a little bit over, thinking a little bit now also about the campaign finance side. And so we had mentioned that organizations that raise and spend funds to influence ballot campaigns, they must register with the Ethics Commission as a BQC or a PAC, so those two types of committees. And what we saw was a potential for gaps in time between the start of petition activity and the registration of the committee with the Ethics Commission. And this is the potential concern or opportunity is that if there's, without timely registration of those entities with the Ethics Commission, the public may not be able to identify who is raising and spending funds early on in the process. So there is a requirement that a committee start register with the commission. There's a certain threshold for PACs and a certain threshold for BQCs. But the question was that we just became aware that there's just no communication so that the Ethics Commission is apprised directly that these petitions have been certified or petition applications have come in. And so it just seemed that possibly something relatively straightforward of a communication between the Secretary of State and the Commission when a petition application has been submitted, it would more get it on their radar, and or including a reminder to register with the Commission in the application materials, or find some other way to sort of highlight that registration requirement so there wouldn't be a gap there. Fifth, we found an opportunity to improve transparency and effectiveness on data on contributions to initiative campaigns by better aligning contributions with expenditures. So there has been a question of interest of who is funding specific initiatives and whether the contributions are from in-state or out-of-state sources. And we are very limited in our ability to look at contributions data because of the way in which that it is managed and held currently. So there was just a few aspects about how it's reported and segregated in the database that makes it very difficult to consistently and reliably identify the source of funds in support or opposition to a specific effort. And the challenge partly comes from the underlying issue is that the expenditures are reported based on what initiative or veto effort they're associated with, but the contributions are reported as to what committee they come into. So I'm going to illustrate a couple scenarios that hopefully might give a little bit better picture than verbally. So in the first two boxes at the top, so here we have a ballot question committee that's supporting on the left-hand side, they're supporting ballot question A, the contributions come in, it goes to the committee, all the expenditures are on ballot question A, clear. Sometimes a ballot question committee may support multiple ballot questions at a time. Not all, this is not what happens all the time, but it is possible. And so in this case, it becomes difficult to associate contributions going to the committee, and they go to the committee generally, so they're reported. And so we can't really find out how many contributions to ballot question A versus how many contributions to ballot question B. The second scenario, again, there's the easy one on the left. And then there's this phenomenon referred to as at the ready by, I guess, people who work in here, that a ballot question committee can sit after sort of after a ballot question can sit and with some unexpended funds from, say, ballot question A, and be ready for a new ballot question to come up that they're interested in supporting. And so as they go and work on ballot question C, some of that is funded with contributions from their previous work on ballot question A. And then third is something referred to as general treasury transfers. So these are when there's higher level parent sort of organizations that transfer money to a BQC or to I guess, there's multiple steps. So in this example that we've illustrated, there could be contributors from multiple states that give money to an organization in Maine that might be multi-purpose organization. And that organization may then decide to give money to a ballot question committee and in support of ballot question A. And so we just wanted to note that then, you can't really trace back the contributions because there's sort of multiple steps in this process from the actual contributor to a contribution to ballot question A. So we just wanted to know the opportunity potentially to consider if there are ways, if that was a particular area of interest, if there are ways to amend or shift some of the reporting requirements. We do note that that would require legislative action, so it's not a simple administrative process. And also there would be administrative burdens if you try to provide more detail on contributions data and require more data collection, and that would create some additional administrative burdens. We're getting there. We're at opportunity for improvement number 6, improve the transparency and effectiveness of the expenditure data. So we were just talking about contributions data, and now we're shifting over to expenditures. And the one thing that we identified as a potential area was giving a specific expenditure category for expenditures on paid signature gathering, just because we've heard that as an area of interest, and we were unable, given the way the data is maintained right now, we were unable to pull out reliably and consistently pull out paid signature gathering expenditures because there's not a specific code. There are 12 categories of expenditures, but this is not one of them, and so it gets kind of funneled into other categories. So if this is an ongoing area of interest of understanding better expenditures on paid signature gathering, we wanted to note that as an opportunity to, if the commission could add that into their system. And I guess they did share with us that their electronic campaign finance system is a third party, that they don't manage that in-house. So they, it's not like immediate, they could just go at it. But just to keep that in mind, that was something that could potentially make it easier to find that information for those who are interested. 7th, again, campaign expenditure data. So this is when I noted, when I gave you the numbers on expenditures, and I noted that OPEGA looked at direct expenditures on campaigns, and that what is reported currently or maintained and reported in the Ethics Commission campaign finance database is total expenditures. And total expenditures include something called committee to committee transfers. And I'm going to illustrate that on the next slide to hopefully give you a better idea. But sometimes multiple ballot question committees can support a single effort, and funds can be moved between those committees. And so if to the extent you want to see a spending on actual goods and services, it can get a little blurry in the way the data is reported right now. So the illustration is you have a BQC, call it X, and you have another ballot question committee Y, and they join forces to create a new jointly managed BQC Z. And upon joining forces, BQC X transfers $100,000 to their newly formed committee. And then, lots of other financials going on here, but then in the course of its work, BQCZ spends that $100,000 on actual direct canvassing, printing, and advertising related to the initiative. And in the reporting, this shows up as $200 in total expenditures. And we just wanted to note that. And in our analysis, we were able to pull that out, but it required sort of getting into the data and doing that work. But at the higher level, like data that's reported, it does show, it would show $200,000 as the total expenditures. So it is consistent doing that. It's consistent with follows all the rules and definitions and statutes. We just thought that, people's impressions of what expenditures are, maybe it could be addressed, even just clarifying what exactly is being reported, or potentially pulling it out for separate. We looked at, for 27 initiatives, we looked at the totals for support, what was spent in support and what was spent in opposition. So that gave us 54 data points, and 13 of those included committee to committee transfers in the total expenditures. And they ranged from 1% to 48% of the total expenditures. So, there's something, sometimes it's just a little bit, but sometimes it was a big chunk of the expenditures that were reported. So we just want to note that. the last opportunity for improvement. We found an opportunity to improve the efficiency and economical use of resources by the committees and the commission by considering adjustments to campaign finance reporting requirements to limit additional reports to those elections in which a committee is participating. So this one has a lot of trade-offs and considerations. Current law requires committees to file primary and general election finance reports, even if the committee has not engaged in any financial activity to influence that particular election. And so, for instance, if there's a ballot question on the November ballot and there's a primary election in June, there's no, not wholly unrelated to the initiative, or the committee is required to file all the required election reports for the June election. So all the reports leading up to the June election and after. And so it's just requiring a lot of reporting that's not directly related to the initiative at hand. However, and so there could be, fewer reports that are made and need to be reviewed, and, some efficiency in time spent on those reports and reviewing those reports. However, the reporting is sort of a very well-oiled system of requirements that is streamlined so that it's clear to the commission what needs to come in when. And so you would need to consider like the potential burdens or challenges for the committees and the commission of maybe then not knowing when to report, and now it's like clear, you always report. And then maybe also getting a better understanding than we currently have about the purposes of those reports and their value in the elections that are not related to the initiative. So getting not exactly to Senator Bennett's point, but we're getting a little bit closer. We did give you a list here of, this report is really looking at the process. There's the trends, and then there's a really deep dive into the process of these and giving the legislature an understanding of the process and issues within the process. And so we did want to note that 3 laws were enacted during the immediately preceding legislature, the 129th, and there's an error on the slide where it says resolve. It should say public law in the second row. My apologies. That is an act. So there are 3 laws that we just wanted to note. One is on requiring data regarding how payment is made for collection of signatures. So that gets to that paid signature gathering question that has come up and requires some additional data on petition circulators, and also requires petition organizations to indicate the method by which they compensate the individuals they hire to circulate petitions. There is an act to make ballot questions easier to read and understand for Maine voters, and that was also enacted. Requires the Secretary of State to draft the ballot question in a clear, concise, and direct manner that describes the subject matter simply. And it also requires that the explanation of a yes vote and a no vote be printed on the ballot immediately below each referendum question. So making that clearer for those at the polls. And then also, finally, the one that I mentioned earlier about requiring hearings for citizens initiatives legislation. And you actually just had an interesting sort of experience with that, because there was a initiated bill that came in while you were when you were in session for the first regular, and then adjourned. It had not yet had a hearing at that point. And so it then went on to the ballot, or is going on the ballot, I should say. And it didn't get afforded a public hearing. But perhaps, I have to look more into the details of the nuances of the timeline. But the intent now is that a hearing happens unless there is a waiver of that by 2/3 of both bodies. But the timing of things this spring was just a bit off the rails at points. So in more directly related to Senator Bennett's question, yes, one is that there was a 2020, we did note there was one question that has been on the ballot since our sample. So we were looking at things that people applied for. Our sample was defined as applications in by a certain date. So this application came in after that, and that was the people's veto to reject the exemptions regarding immunization. So the law that removed the exemptions on childhood immunizations for students to attend schools, there was a people's veto election on that in March of 2020. And that has been the one that made it to the ballot since the time of our study. And as Senator Bennett noted, there was also significant activity related to in the prior year expenditures on campaign that then did not end up going to the ballot, as it was ruled not properly, that was not proper to go to the ballot. So that one of the CMP ones. And there's obviously ongoing interest in that areas. And so that wraps up sort of our little bit of an update. I'm sure there's plenty more that we could say about current. I know there's certain things going on right now that have not in a final disposition. So we held off on talking about the 130th until things get to a final disposition. We just really want to thank the management and staff at the Secretary of State and the Commission on Governmental Ethics and Election Practices for their cooperation with OPEGA throughout the review. We also want to thank the Office of the Attorney General, the Revisor Statutes, OFPR, OPLA, as well as the municipal registrars, notaries, publics, and other participants in the committees, ballot question committees, and PACs who we spoke with. We had a lot of cooperation and assistance, and are very thankful for everyone's role. And as I mentioned earlier, basically to all of the OPEGA staff who have contributed to this report this project at one point or another, as it went through its various iterations. And then Matt and Scott, who are here with me today as the subject matter experts. That wraps up our presentation.
Thank you, Lucia. Thank you to the staff and of course all the folks involved in this report. It looks like we've got potentially one issue identified and several recommendations that perhaps will take the form of a bill for the next half of the 130th legislature. I know that we have some folks from the Department of Secretary of State and the Maine Commission on Ethics and Governmental Practices. They are available to committee members if you have questions for them today. Just as a reminder, we will have a public hearing on this report at our next August meeting. And that, of course, is an opportunity for both of those agencies to provide their comments and feedback to us as well. So with that being said, are there any questions or comments that committee members have that can be answered by either of those agencies? Representative Arata.
Thank you. I was surprised the issue of so many invalidated signatures didn't come out. I mean, in 2016, that's quite an alarming number of signatures that were invalid. And I would like to know why, and perhaps a recommendation would be to have more clear instructions for the petitioners and signees if there was something wrong with the way they filled out. Sometimes I've noticed it is a little complicated for people, especially who aren't used to government language. Maybe anybody who wants to could answer that question. Thanks.
So Lucia, I think Representative Arata has posed a question/comment, and maybe we could invite the staff from the Secretary of State's office to join us and provide a response. Not only do we have the staff, we've got the Secretary of State herself, Shannon Bellows, and Deputy Secretary of State Julie Flynn. Good morning and welcome. I turn the floor over to you to provide a response to Representative Arata's question.
Thank you, and I will defer to Deputy Secretary Flynn for many of the technical questions that you may have. I will just say from a big picture perspective, one of the things that I learned this year, because of course there are multiple petitions efforts that have taken place since I was sworn in January, is that we in elections do not have an investigations division. So when people have concerns about potential petition fraud or things of that sort, we can refer that to the Attorney General's office for investigation, but we ourselves don't have the personnel that are specifically trained to do that type of investigation, nor do we have enforcement authority. So when we see a petition that has so many signatures that are not valid, even if there are concerns that they're a fraud, we don't have statutory authority or personnel to investigate that. And then the second thing that I would say in terms of additional public education or work that could be done to help petitioners understand their responsibilities, I think the staff does an amazing job within existing resources. There's currently a team of 8 people. Last year alone, the elections division overtime was 2,933 hours. So they're just working as hard as they can, and their level of integrity and performance with that small team is truly incredible, and I think unparalleled across state government. I don't think anyone is doing quite that level of work. So I'm going to throw it over to Deputy Secretary Flynn if there's anything that you wanted to add to address Representative Arata's question.
Yes, thank you. I'm Julie Flynn, Deputy Secretary of State. I've been here 26 years, so I've done probably 100 or more petition certifications in my time here. The biggest category of invalid signatures is people who are not registered to vote. And despite the clarity of instructions that I believe we provide to the proponents and that they are supposed to provide to their circulators, we have a separate set of instructions specifically for circulators. You can ask a voter to sign. They say they're a voter in the town in which they're signing, and they're not. And that's not something that's fraudulent. It's just, you know, some people don't know how to say no, and they don't want to say that they're not registered to vote. And that's just the way it is. We don't count signatures of people who are not registered to vote. So the other issues, the duplicates, again, you know, you can train them to say you should make sure to ask somebody, look, if you've signed this before, please don't sign again. But sometimes there's a lot of initiatives circulating at the same time and asking for signatures. They may not remember that that's the one that they've signed, you know, a couple months ago or 6 months ago. And so them signing a second time, they're not intentionally doing something fraudulent, and it's not anything the circulator would know. But I do think, you know, there are some instances, and we have provided those to the Attorney General's office, and we have prosecuted a couple individuals in the past for, you know, knowingly falsifying signatures. That is clearly fraud. Somebody signing someone else's name or watching somebody sign someone else's name to a petition. And so where we're able to have an investigation done by the Attorney General's office and a prosecution successfully done, you know, we pursue that with all vigor.
Follow up, Representative Arata.
Thank you. Real quick, is somebody allowed to fill out another person's all the lines on the petition except for the signature? Could it, like, you know, I've seen spouses where they say, oh, my husband's writing is terrible, I'll just fill in our address, print his name, but then he signs. Is that acceptable?
Yes, it is acceptable. The only thing the voter absolutely has to do is the signature. And now, as a result of the, in few months' time, as a result of our election bill, only a person with a disability who's unable to sign, they will now be able to have a person sign their name for them at their direction. That's part of the constitutional amendment that was passed in 2019, and that we've had the legislature implement through legislation this past session. So, but that would be the only instance. Everybody else, they at least have to put their signature, and the proponent or a family member or somebody can fill in the rest of the information, and that's legal to do. And actually better if it's legible than somebody like our doctors or other people who have notoriously bad handwriting.
All right, thank you.
Are there additional questions or comments from the committee for the secretary or the deputy secretary? Seeing none, we thank you both for joining us this morning and for your participation and support on this project for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there questions or comments for the Maine Ethics Commission from the committee? I'm not seeing any questions or comments, but I'm seeing Director Wayne. Good morning to you. Thank you for listening in. I'm sure we'll look forward to continuing this conversation at the public hearing in August.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. If folks are ready to move on, we can move to unfinished business. Item number two, tab number 2. Request for OPEGA to review the RFP administered by the Department of Public Safety, Bureau of Highway Safety. We've done some initial work on this and had initial discussion. But at this time, I think I'm going to turn it over to Lucia, unless you'd like me to run through some procedures.
No, I think that's fine. I just want to kind of catch everybody up. So this was presented to you on May 14th and by Representative Bell. And you had some initial discussions then about needing more information to make a well-informed decision about whether to add it to OPEGA's work plan. So you revisited those information requests at your last meeting and sent us off to gather information and people. So we have gathered for you and sent out in your packet the background materials that you requested. They're included, you should have received these last week. We provided the RFP, we provided the state agency rules governing purchases of services and awards and the rules for appeal of contract and awards. We provided the state statute governing the competitive bid process, and we provided a relevant portion of a 2008 OPEGA report on professional contracting, contracting for professional services, excuse me. So part of some of the questions, the other thing was to ask that we invite the agencies involved, those being the Department of Public Safety, Bureau of Highway Safety, folks from there to be available to answer questions today, as well as folks from the Department of Administrative and Financial Services who oversee contracting for the state, as well as the sponsor to come today if you had specific questions for them. We also wanted just to note for you, in looking at the broad context of it, you had some specific questions that you had asked earlier related to contracting, and the DAFS commissioner did supply some of those answers in advance, and it's my understanding that the commissioner is unavailable today due to budget proceedings, but has other people available to answer your questions. But you should have gotten by email from the commissioner some background information about the overall numbers and incidents of contracts and appeals and the like. So we provided that to you. The prior OPEGA report, I would just note that it was born out of an interest in looking at costs. And so it was mostly, but as part of that, the interest was to identify cost saving opportunities in contracting. But the first part of that report, which we provided to you, provides an overview of the state procurement and RFP processes that we thought was helpful background. And that while some of the details have changed, the overview from 2008 is really generally reflective of the current processes. Before you go to questions, I did just want to turn your attention to tab J in your notebooks for those of you who have tab J. And let me see if I can, I'm going to quickly, yeah, okay, hold on. I'm going to share my screen just quickly so that we can review what your task is right now. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see that. So what you're deciding is whether it makes sense for OPEGA to consider a review, and you sort of went through part one. It's a really high level screening, and these questions would rule it out, and nothing ruled it out. And so then the question was, does GOC want further consideration for possible addition to for the plan for program reviews, or what we call the work plan, or placement on a standby list? And then if that's the case, then the direction, and these are in GOC policies and procedures, is to go to part two of the checklist to really look at the priority and whether an issue rises to the level of priority and appropriateness for consideration. And so let me see if I can I just want you to look quickly at this checklist, which is in your notebooks if you have them. So what you have before you today is really trying to figure out if the topic is a high enough priority to warrant adding to OPEGA's standby list or current work plan. And here are some of the things for your consideration: the financial impact on the state, the public impact, what portion of Maine citizens are affected, citizens and or businesses, how the potential severity of those impacts, and other public impacts. Also legislative impact, the degree of legislative committee concern or interest in the topic, whether it's something perennially discussed or considered by the legislature, whether it's frequent complaints or frequent requests for OPEGA reviews, frequent or significant media coverage, and on and on. We did review, in preparation for today, we did go back through all the OPEGA requests that we received, and we did not have any, we just note that we have not had other requests related to this topic. And then finally, again, severity, potential risk, fraud, law violations, and gross mismanagement. So those are some of the things that just to keep in mind as you're having your conversations today and thinking through what you want to do next. So I thought I would just refresh our minds there. So with that, if there's questions about the material that OPEGA provided, I'm happy to field those or turn it over for you to ask representatives of the departments or the sponsor.
Thank you, Lucia. I think at this point, we'd invite DAF's representatives to either make a brief presentation or remarks or provide responses to the questions that we've posed. I'm not quite sure who from the DAFs is taking the lead on this.
I believe you have Elaine Clark here for the commissioner.
Ms. Clark, good morning and welcome.
And I'd like to start, if I may, by
I'm not sure if there is a delay on your end, Ms. Clark, but you are welcome to proceed.
Yeah, there was a delay, so I was working very hard to listen in on the message. If I could do a brief introduction, and then Jamie Shore is I have a terrible echo going on. I'm really sorry. So I'm just going to run through this. Distinguished members of the Government Oversight Committee, my name is Elaine Clark. I'm Deputy Commissioner of DAFs. And yes, there is. Can you hear me if I just continue through?
Yes, Elaine, and you might switch off your video if that helps improve the connection.
I wonder if I should re-log in. I'm really sorry about this, but
I personally can't stand it when I have that echo, so please feel free to take the opportunity to log out and log back in again.
Okay, thank
I know
you.
it's very distracting.
Thanks.
I have a thunderstorm here at my house in Stonington, in case anybody's interested. Tried to run outside to let the dog in.
Any other weather reports from around the state while we wait?
No weather reports, but I will note it's really nice to not have 2 children and 2 dogs and cats and everything in the background. So it's actually really quiet where I am, and that's very appreciated this morning.
You just described what I do have in the background: 2 kids, a dog, a couple of cats. But I believe discussing whether we're going to return to in-person meetings is on our agenda today. Here we go. She's back.
Okay, Elaine, the floor is yours if you're ready.
If this is working, I'll leave my video on.
Sure.
Okay. First of all, sorry about all that. And thank you to the distinguished members of the Government Oversight Committee. My name is Elaine Clark. I'm Deputy Commissioner of DAPS. And as you know, Commissioner Figueroa had planned to attend today's meeting, but she's otherwise predisposed on budget issues at AFA. We're happy to answer all of your questions, but I would like to address 3 points really quickly because they may not have been conveyed in the materials, and they will give you a little bit of a sense of the department, of the Division of Procurement. The first is that the role that procurement plays in purchasing for the state and all their other work, their interagency cooperation, which is a really key element here, and the expertise of leadership in the unit. The procurement services led by Jamie Shore manages the purchase, procurement, and acquisition of all contractual services, materials, and equipment for state of Maine government via open and transparent competition. Their job is to facilitate the economic use of public funds toward the acquisition of the highest quality goods and services at the lowest possible cost. They lend purchasing expertise to individual state agencies, and they're facilitator to that end for all state agencies, relying on the agencies as subject matter experts. The agencies are the true arbiter of the goods and services that they need. To use a highway safety analogy, procurement maintains the roads and the individual state agencies are the drivers. In terms of interagency cooperation, procurement facilitates transactions for agencies and state government and prides itself on its strong collaboration and relationship to those agencies. This was evidenced in particular during the pandemic, when the procurement services team played a major role in the state's response. The division worked very closely and seamlessly with the Maine CDC, Department of Education, MEMA, and DHHS to procure personal protective equipment needed for the CDC stockpile and used by hospitals, nursing homes, public schools, and a number of other private and public institutions across the state of Maine. Jamie and her team worked closely with DOE to procure for Maine children who needed technology and other Wi-Fi amid the pandemic, the resources they needed to keep up with their schoolwork. And on a daily basis, procurement works closely with all state agencies, including bureaus within DAFS, DOT, and the issues range from very complex to very straightforward. In terms of the expertise of this unit, Amy Shore has a BA in criminal justice. She also holds an MBA from New England College and a JD from the Regents University School of Law. She is a board member of the National Association of Procurement Officers and herself hosts a biweekly podcast entitled Public Procurement Change Agents. I'm going to defer to her for specifics about the procurement process, but I would like to express that Jamie provides directional leadership and strategic management of the Division of Procurement. She and her team support open and transparent competition, and again, the economic use of funds for getting the best quality services possible at the lowest cost. You'll see from the materials submitted that the process in this case worked. It did discern an error within this one particular RFP that the appeals panel found. Errors are extremely rare, but the statutory structure provides a remedy to find and correct errors. Thank you. And with that, Jamie Shore is most familiar with the specifics and lives and breathes, frankly, the procurement process, and she can address your specific questions.
Thank you, Elaine. And before we go to Jamie, I just ask if the folks from DAFS could keep their remarks to the subject that we are looking at, which is the specific RFP that was invalidated and the questions that we posed and the response received from DAFS. So with that context, Jamie, we'd be happy to have you walk through the letter you sent us.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you'll just give me a moment to pull it up.
For committee members, it was a letter dated June 22nd, forwarded by Lucia. That was forwarded onto the committee, correct?
Yeah, hold on. Yes, so they submitted a letter on Wednesday. I have it, I can share it if you need it, but it was forwarded. They sent it to me and I forwarded it to you all on Wednesday evening, I believe. I can check, double check. I also, like I said, I can always screen share if that's helpful.
Are folks able to find the letter? Are the committee members able to find the letter? Okay, so Jamie, go right ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As mentioned, my name is Jamie Shore. I am the Chief Procurement Officer for the Department of Administrative and Financial Services, overseeing the purchase of goods, services, technology, materials, et cetera, for state government. This particular RFP was an RFP that was released from the Department of Public Safety under the Bureau of Highway Safety for sports marketing services. The letter that was transmitted to the committee through Lucia on June 22nd takes you through the overview of the procurement process and then into some details about this particular RFP. I'm happy to run through some of the details just briefly. I did note there is a chat. Senator Bennett could not find the letter. So Lucia, I didn't know if you wanted to share your screen so that everybody could see the letter.
Sure.
Thanks.
It'll just take me 1 second. Make sure that you want to start while I locate it?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Okay.
Just quickly, right? DAF's procurement services, for the past 12 years, we really have gone through the maturity. We started out 12 years ago as more of a purchasing agency focused on transactions, and we've matured over the years to focus on procurement, which requires analysis, really demonstrating partnership with our colleagues at the various state agencies to make sure that we provide an open, ethical, transparent process. As you can see from the letter, as Lucia pulls that up, 11,575 procurements over the past few years. My team, we ebb and flow with the number of people that we have on our team, but approximately between 18 and 20 people focused on procurements throughout the state of Maine. Of the 11,575 procurement requests, I would just note less than half of a percentage point has led to an appeal request, and all told, less than 0.04 percentage point of solicitations have been invalidated, as in this instance with Mr. Wood's company, TideSmart Global. In 2020, just for an example, there were only 7 appeal requests, 6 of which we granted to a hearing. And this was the only award decision that was invalidated. Despite the rarity of this occurrence, DAFs followed all appropriate statutory, rule, regulatory processes, and other governing obligations, as well as best procurement practices. As you can see from the letter, Lucia, I'm at the top of page 2. We do identify the relative statutory guidance, Title V, Section 1825B, and then more specifically, the RFP process is governed by Section 1825D and Chapter 110, the rules for the purchase of services and awards. Going through the RFP process, I won't take you through ad nauseum. I would just overall highlight there are 5 broad steps in an RFP process that every agency should follow. As Lucia has the letter in front of you, we linked to a really, I call it fancy, but it's a very colorful poster that we released to all state agencies that if you're a state employee, you can hang it in your office and we can give you that guide for conducting an RFP process. The various phases, bear with me just a moment. The various phases include phase 1, drafting the RFP and identifying the evaluation team who will ultimately review the proposals received and conduct consensus scoring. That process does involve mostly with the agency as the subject matter experts, taking you back to Elaine's analogy, whereby we really build the roads of procurement, but the subject matter experts within the agencies drive the vehicles on the roads. So the agencies focus on drafting the RFPs, they identify the evaluation team, and then they submit that document to DAF's procurement services in phase 2 as part of the review and approval of the RFP. My team, we have a dedicated unit within the procurement services division focused solely on the request for proposals process because it can be very complex. They review for completion of the document itself, clear terms identified within the RFP, the ability for the marketplace to understand the purchase requirements, open fairness to all potential bidders, violations of law, and document quality. Once my team has reviewed and approved, we move to phase 3, which is, of course, where we publish the document for public review by the marketplace and potential bidders. By statute, we publish the document in the Kennebec Journal for 3 days. And then in addition to that requirement, we go above and beyond. We post it on our website, and then we ask our state agencies to remit all proposals or send out communication to potential bidders in the marketplace. Thereafter, once we go through a questions and answers document and a portion of time frame where the marketplace can ask questions, seek clarity on the RFP that was published, we ultimately here at Procurement Services receive the proposals from the bidders. We again review those, make sure that they are received timely. They're all submitted electronically. And then we work with the agency to ensure that there's no conflicts of interest. And ultimately we submit the proposals to the evaluating contracting agency. Phase 4, we move into the proposal evaluation and award. That's done in a 2-step mini process whereby each individual evaluator receives a copy of the proposal. They take their time to review each proposal individually, making comments around what things they found positive within the proposal. Maybe there's some negative comments that they're a little bit cautious about. They have questions perhaps about the proposal or interesting facts. And then all of those individual reviewers come back together and they meet with the team and complete consensus scoring, whereby they assign points on a 100-point scale, costs being allocated to a 25% of the total evaluation points at a minimum. And then they ultimately arrive at the total point value for that proposal. The conditional award notification is then released by the contracting state agency with approval of DAF's procurement services. And then we move into the phase 5, which is post-award. Per statute, any aggrieved party has 10 days to request a stay of the awarded contract and 15 days to request an appeal hearing. All appeals are submitted to the DAF's Director of the Bureau of General Services. And during this time, state agencies may or may not choose to negotiate with bidders. Thank you, Lucia. There's my beautiful colored poster that everyone can have a copy of. That's the general overview of the RFP process. Just to, I think, give a quick highlight of this RFP from a procurement perspective. So following the standard process, as I just described to you, the Department of Public Safety sought proposals to provide sports marketing services. The selected vendor would be marketing in a professional sports setting and special events, promoting Maine Bureau of Highway Safety behavioral safety programs. Those marketing methods included public service announcements, signage, information displays, and personal interaction with the public. This is all as indicated in Part 1, the introduction of the RFP document, which I believe was transmitted to the committee. The RFP anticipated making one award with a contract start date of October 1st of 2020. And that included subsequent renewals through September 30th of 2025. This RFP included a 100-point scale, as mentioned. All proposals were evaluated with an organizational qualifications and experience allotted for 35 points, proposed services for 35 points, and then the cost proposal at 30 points. There were 2 proposals submitted and received by DAF's procurement services. One was from Alliance Sports Marketing, and then the other was from TideSmart Global, of course. There were 3 individual evaluators that reviewed the proposal. Nicholas Brown from the Department of Public Safety, a highway safety program coordinator. Ann Wood, also from the Department of Public Safety. She's a contract grant specialist. And Jamie Pilot, again, from the Department of Public Safety, a senior contract grant specialist. So the evaluators took their time to familiarize themselves with the RFP, the summary of the questions and answers, and then reviewed each of the proposals. Individual evaluation notes were taken per the standard process. And then on August 26th of 2020, the evaluation team met to conduct consensus scoring. Ultimately, the master score sheet reflecting the resulting points, Alliance Sports Marketing received 100 points out of the 100-point scale. TideSmart Global received 89.5 points out of the 100-point scale. And lastly, we get into the appeal of the RFP. TideSmart Global.
Actually, Jamie, I'm sorry if I could just pause for a moment. Can you just describe a bit for us the 3 evaluators, how they develop their scores? Do they do that independently and then convene, or is it some other process?
Yeah, of course, Mr. Chair. The evaluators, as I mentioned, conduct a 2-part process. The individual evaluation notes, which is sort of phase 1, that process is where the individual evaluators review the proposals to prepare for consensus scoring. During the individual evaluation process, evaluators do not score, so they do not assign any points. That portion of the process is just for them to familiarize themselves with the proposals that were submitted, to prepare for the consensus scoring. That's where they jot down notes around things that they loved in the proposal, things they maybe didn't love so much, things they found interesting, or questions. The second phase is the consensus scoring, whereby the team gets together and they review each proposal one at a time, one section at a time, comparing the proposal to the requirements set forth in the RFP. So for example, the 3-person evaluation team would review proposal A, the qualifications and experience, and they would talk about it, they would take notes, and then they would throw out a point value up to 35 points in this case. And they would continue on section by section, proposal by proposal until completion.
In the case of Alliance and Tide Smart Review, were any of the 3 evaluators a direct report to another evaluator? That is to say, was any, were the 3 individuals free to make their own decisions, or was a supervisor also in the room?
Yeah, that's a great question. All 3 of the evaluators are completely independent from their supervisors and or any other process. I will defer, however, to Department of Public Safety to note the hierarchy, as I'm not familiar.
Okay. Is there anyone from DPS that is able to answer that question?
Good morning, Senator Libby, Representative McDonald, and members of the committee. I'm Kendra Coates. I'm the Assistant to the Commissioner at the Department of Public Safety. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. We're happy to help and answer any questions that you may have. For the actual hierarchy, with me today is Lauren Stewart. She's the director of that Highway Safety Department. So Lauren, can you answer that question, please?
Certainly, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you again for allowing us to be here with you today. My name is Lauren Stewart. I'm the director of the Bureau of Highway Safety within the Department of Public Safety. To directly answer your question, 2 of the evaluators are contract grant specialists. There's Ann Wood, who was a new contract grant specialist, and her supervisor is Jamie Pelot. So Ann reports directly to Jamie. So that's the hierarchy within that. The other evaluator is Nicholas Brown, and he reports directly to me.
Thank you. Appreciate you folks jumping on to answer the question. So thanks for giving me a little leave here. Jamie, if you want to continue, please go ahead.
Sure, I think I left off at the appeal of this particular RFP. So I'll just highlight the process and the appeal that ensued. So TideSmart Global submitted a request for stay and a request for appeal hearing to Procurement Services on September 14th of 2020. The following day, Procurement Services denied the request for stay due to lack of timeliness. It was outside the 10-day period, but we did grant the request for appeal hearing. The awarded party, Alliance Sports Marketing, applied for intervener status on September 19th of 2020 in order to participate in the hearing, and DAFS granted that status on September 23rd. Procurement Services followed statute and rules to arrange the appeal hearing. Ultimately, exhibits were due by October 21st of 2020, with multiple pre-trial hearings being held beginning in mid-October through the remainder of the month. The appeal hearing began on October 20th of 2020. The 3-person appeal panel was comprised of Dick Thompson from the Department of Administrative and Financial Services, the Deputy Commissioner, Lindsay Kendall, Department of Administrative and Financial Services, Procurement Analyst 2, and Gilbert Bilodeau, also from the Department of Administrative and Financial Services, a Service Center Director. The appeal panel considered 5 arguments made by the petitioner, TideSmart Global, and ultimately the appeal panel invalidated the award made to Alliance Sports Marketing for irregularities, creating fundamental unfairness. And I'm just going to describe those 5 points. The petitioner alleged that the RFP's scope of work and associated appendices were lacking sufficient detail to aid in the development of an accurate cost proposal. Chapter 110 titled The Rules for the Purchases of Services and Awards, states the request for proposal must contain at a minimum a clear definition or scope of the project, the evaluation criteria, and relative scoring weights to be applied, the proposal opening date and time, and agency contact person. The panel found the scope of work did not meet the requirement in Chapter 110 as referenced. The only detail pertaining to the actual work to be done was found in Appendix H of the RFP, which still failed to give relevant parameters for each event in order to associate accurate cost. This level of detail, if not conveyed through the RFP, would only be the knowledge of the incumbent and therefore is fundamentally unfair. Number two, the petitioner also alleged through evidence shown on the RFP evaluation and planning form that the Maine Bureau of Highway Safety did not adequately research the market for qualified potential bidders other than the incumbent. The panel found that though there was shown to be little effort by Maine Bureau of Highway Safety to research other potential bidders, the minimum requirements of the form were met, and there was no evidence that the procurement services team found the form to be unsatisfactory. Point number three, the petitioner alleged that the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic should have been included in the RFP, as the services requested could very well be impacted by the pandemic. The panel found that the COVID-19 pandemic was not appropriately considered in the consensus scoring of either proposal. Point number four, the petitioner attempted to show evidence that deemed the members of the evaluation team unfit for their role in evaluating the proposals as a result of the RFP. The panel found that all three members of the evaluation team were chosen by the Maine Bureau of Highway Safety and followed the process described within Chapter 110. And number five, the appellant alleged that the eligibility requirements within the RFP were arbitrary in nature, creating a fundamental unfairness. The panel reviewed the evidence, testimony, and the eligibility requirements set forth in the RFP and resolved that the requirement for bidders to have already obtained certification as a road safety professional prior to the proposal due date was indeed unusual. The panel discovered that the intervener, Alliance Sports Marketing, had contacted Lauren Stewart of the Maine Bureau of Highway Safety on May 7th of 2020 and noted the RSP certification had been obtained by Brandon Vonderhaar, president of Alliance Sports Marketing. It was not clear, however, what Maine Bureau of Highway Safety did to research the RSP certification and its prevalence in the industry at the time of drafting the RFP, or how Maine Bureau of Highway Safety would have otherwise considered the RSP certification necessary enough to include as an eligibility requirement without the email from the intervener. And I take the time to read that portion because it is part of the formal record. And I didn't want to put that into my own words. I wanted to make sure that the record accurately was reflected to this committee. The appeal hearing ultimately concluded on November 14th of 2020. A discussion took place with the appeal panel on November 18th of 2020, and Procurement Services issued its, strike that, the appeal panel issued its appeal decision internally on December 2nd, and ultimately was then transmitted to the parties on December 7th of 2020. In conclusion of the appeal hearing, I would just note to the committee, Tidesmart Global sought the remedy of invalidation of the contract award to Alliance Sports Marketing, and the three-person appeal panel granted the relief that was sought. This was the extent of their jurisdiction as dictated by statute. Except as provided in an additional paragraph, an appeal panel may not modify the contract or grant award under appeal or make a new award. And that's dictated under Chapter 120, the rules for appeal of contract and grant awards. In addition, there was language in the RFP, as is in every RFP. Issuance of an RFP does not commit the department to issue an award or to pay expenses incurred by a bidder in the preparation of a response to the RFP. And I'm happy to answer any additional questions. I know that's a pretty big overview.
Thank you, Jamie. This RFP was published July 10th, 2020. Is that correct?
Say yes, but let me look at my chart. It was published on July 14th of 2020.
And you noted, you read into our record comments regarding the incumbent provider contacting DPS, informing them of some certification that they secured. What was the acronym you used?
It's Road Safety Professional, RSP, not to be confused with RFP.
And was RSP certification part of the RFP that occurred well before 2020, this current iteration?
This service had previously gone out to RFP in 2015, and I am not aware of including an RSP certification in prior iterations. I will defer to my colleagues at Department of Public Safety to expand on that answer.
I guess I would pose that question to Director Lauren Stewart. I'm sorry, I can't see the rest of your hyphenated last name. I pose that question to, or pose a question to you, which is what generated or necessitated having this certification be part of the 2020 RFP?
Yes, thank you. I can answer that question for you. So the prior RFP did not include any road safety certification information. That was a fairly new certification that I had learned about through the Governor's Highway Safety Association, of which I am the executive secretary. And we'd had many meetings with other states regarding this certification. And its intent and purpose is to ensure that highway safety officials and those who are working for highway safety offices are extremely skilled in traffic safety. And because lots of times the vendors that are supplying the services for us are working on behalf of the state because we don't have the staff to attend the events and deal with the public, such as we're submitting services for. In this particular instance, the road safety professional certification was included in this RFP, not originally as an eligibility requirement, but as a preference, something that we thought would be nice because it lended additional assurance that we were working with professionals who understood the traffic safety world. And I'll just expand a little bit on that to say that ultimately, through some misunderstood guidance that we received from purchases, that was moved into an eligibility space in the RFP, which was not discovered by us until the question and answer period. So when my staff asked me to review the questions and answers as part of the normal RFP process, it was discovered that that was in there as an eligibility. And so we attempted to correct that in the questions and answer portion of the RFP to let all bidders know that that was not an eligibility requirement. I think, sir, what we should have done is amended the RFP, but we didn't. We thought we could fix it in the Q&A. And ultimately, that did not work for us in the appeal process. And we now know the different way to do that.
Okay. So is the incumbent provider continuing to provide the service to DPS today?
No, sir. Those services ended on September 30th of 2020.
Okay. And so what has the department planned for procuring these services going forward?
We have not planned to procure those services going forward.
Okay. So this is not a directive of the legislature in a budget document. The department has discretion whether or not to procure sports marketing services as part of highway safety.
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Are there further questions or comments from the committee for representatives from DAFs or DPS?
Chairman Libby, will I have an opportunity to speak?
We'll consider that in a moment. Mr. Woods.
Thank you.
Senator Bennett has his hand up.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple questions. I'll start with a minor one, I think. It was just interesting in the letter on the regarding the appeal of the RFP, those 5 points. 4 of them starts with talking about the petitioner. The 5th one talks about the appellant. And I was wondering if there's a particular reason for that. I believe they're the same party, and just curious about the change in terminology and what significance that might have. Maybe for DAFs.
Senator Bennett, I'm happy to answer that. It's most likely an error in a word choice on behalf of DAFs, but I will just note, if to get into the technicality of procurement, a petitioner is someone who has requested an appeal hearing. Once the hearing is granted, that entity is then we refer to as an appellant. So it's just simply a word choice on behalf of DAFs.
Okay, so does it have some sort of relationship to their original issues that they raised or concerns they raised versus an issue that was raised later, or is it just a misapplication of the word?
No, it's the same party. Misapplication.
Okay. Question for the highway folks. Just to take a step farther to Senator Libby's question, I'm wondering what was the rationale for apparently abandoning the RFP after this appeal? Why did you determine that the services are really actually not needed, or was there some other reason?
I can answer that question for you, sir.
Thank you.
So our highway safety plan runs on a federal fiscal year. So our intent in submitting this RFP back in July is that we would have a vendor on board for October 1st to be able to conduct those services through September 30th of the following year. When this appeal happened, it was not finalized until December, which is several months already into the federal fiscal year. It takes a long time to create an RFP. Obviously, they're long, they're confusing, they're hard to do, and it would have taken us several months into the spring, which would have probably put us 5 or 6 months into the federal fiscal year before we'd be looking at awarding a contract. So we elected not to do that. And the second reason is we didn't, at that time, schools were still not allowing people inside to conduct events or to have speakers or gathering groups of students together for traffic safety events, and sports venues still were not having, in-person sporting events. So the high schools were not allowing fans into their basketball games or hockey games or those sorts of things. So it didn't make sense for us to spend the time issuing another RFP for those services.
Mr. Chair, may I just add to that answer?
I see that Senator Bennett may have had a follow-up, so I think I'm going to ask Senator Bennett for his follow-up, and then Jamie, you can add to that.
Yeah, I was not directly on the same point, but let me ask the question, and then you guys can figure it out. Thank you. The other question was just regarding that RSP certification, and it seemed like it was subsequently determined to be important, but I read in the overview of the RFP in the letter, it says the marketing methods included public service announcements, signage, information displays. And then it says, and personal interaction with the public using local law enforcement and MEBHS staff during events. So I was just wondering the conclusion that an RSP certification was relevant here at all, given that it wasn't the vendor that would be doing the personal interactions, but rather the local law enforcement and Bureau of Highway Safety staff.
In fact, it is the vendor that would be doing the in-person events at all of these sporting venues, community fairs, festivals, et cetera, et cetera. It is the vendor that is expected to do that. Occasionally, the Bureau of Highway Safety staff will attend, and occasionally law enforcement will participate as well. But again, I just want to reiterate that the intention was never to have that RSP certification as an eligibility requirement.
Right.
It got moved to that spot through a misunderstanding by one of the contract grant specialists from some information that was provided, some great information that was provided from the Department of Purchases on where it should be. And the individual didn't understand the significance of it. She moved it into the eligibility. And again, it wasn't discovered until the Q&A process where we attempted to fix it.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Happy to circle back, Mr. Chairman, if you wish, to the unresolved question.
Yes, thank you. So I think, Jamie, you had a response to the prior question.
I just wanted to comment briefly on the timeline. So should the Bureau of Highway Safety still need the services as originally outlined, a competitive bid would have to be initiated, and we would follow that standard 5-phase RFP process as I outlined before. And we have been in touch with the Bureau of Highway Safety. Obviously, we do not have an RFP draft that we are reviewing right now. Should they submit a draft to us in short order, my team would be happy to help facilitate that process. And conceivably, an RFP could take place in July and August for execution as early as this fall.
Thank you, Jamie. Further questions or comments from committee members? Mr. Woods is the appellant in this matter. I think typically we may invite a legislative sponsor to make comments to the committee on behalf of, a party such as Mr. Woods. The legislative sponsor is not here. I think given the circumstance, I'm open to having Mr. Woods make brief comments or address points that have been raised. I don't know if we're looking for a very extensive presentation here, but if there's no objection from the committee, I'm open to giving Mr. Woods the floor at this time. Is there any objection from the committee? Seeing none, Mr. Woods, please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Libby. Thank you, state senators, representatives, and staff. Ms. Nixon, much like Jamie Shore, I had sent correspondence yesterday with some attachments with the request that they be passed along to the GOC group. Can you, just for context, can you let me know if that was done?
Yes, it was.
Great, thank you. My name is Steve Woods. I'm CEO and owner of TideSmart Global. We've been in business here in Maine since 2003. We're based in Falmouth, Maine. A lot of details were discussed over the last 40 minutes or so, so I want to add a little bit of context, and I'll be brief, Chairman Libby. We are an event marketing experiential company. We specialized in driver programs as well as other programs for 20 years. Prior to that, I was a consultant with Ford. We've worked with BMW. We're a DOT operator, which means we operate a fleet of commercial vehicles. In addition, I hold a CDL Class A license, and we have lots of credentials that would have, or I believe should have been, relevant to the RFP. We have a staffing business. We own a logistics company. We operate from an 8-acre campus. We have extensive experience in Maine, and we met the requirements that should have been part of the RFP. Also of note, we were and we are reluctant to challenge and appeal this RFP process. In 18 years, we've never pursued or been a defendant to any kind of litigation or challenge. We've been part of hundreds and hundreds of RFPs, and I've never been involved with one similar in any way to this, and I will give detail because I think it's important to cover. This was unique and I believe egregious. leaving us no choice but to pursue a review, not just for our business interest and community members, but as importantly for Maine, the state of Maine, and for the taxpayers. From my understanding, much of the funding for this program over the last 10 years has been through the DOT, through the state, but whether it's federal funds or state funds, I believe all taxpayers should have a right and a demand to make sure those funds are spent responsibly. Also, as evidenced by our longstanding positive business relationship with the state, we've contracted with the Maine CDC and Department of Health and Human Services for multiple programs over the last year. We're a testing partner with the CDC. We're also a vaccination partner. We also store vaccine. And I believe everyone from Dr. Shaw to other members of the CDC would characterize us as an A+ business partner, which I think goes to credibility and also our perspective. Also, as the former chairman of the Yarmouth Planning Board, a 3-year chairman of the Yarmouth Town Council, a former candidate for U.S. Senate, I'm sensitive to the challenges of government at all levels, and I've dedicated my career to try to help civic and governmental process. So please accept that spirit attached to this request. In short, the Bureau under Director Lauren Stewart had approximately a 10-year contractual relationship with a third party based in Nashville, Tennessee. The state no longer has a favored state clause as far as part of procurement. It had in years past, but it doesn't have now, which has some relevancy. So that relationship I would characterize as very, very close. Everything I'm about to mention and all the attachments I sent to the staff were entered into evidence during the appeal. So I think that also goes to their credibility and their context. The close relationship was also personified by Ms. Stewart, who had done what I had characterized as advertisements on Alliance Sports Marketing website. There were 2 panels, quotes directly attributed to Ms. Stewart that apparently were there for months, if not years, saying what a great business partner ASM was. In July 2020, the Bureau issued RFP 202-006-107, and I believe it was intentionally designed, constructed, and scored with one purpose, and that was to continue the 10-year relationship with ASM, Alliance Sports Marketing. It was a 1-year contract with 4-year renewals, significant funding. In the past, I think it was approximately $4 to $6 million in aggregate. This contract could have represented approximately $4 million. Although the appeal panel limited their decision to, I think, 2 of the elements I brought up, that I believe does not negate the validity or the substance of all of the arguments. The fundamentally unfair approach, we talked about the RSP. For context, that credential only existed for a few months before the RFP. And there was not one human being in all of Maine out of 1.3 million people that had the RSP credential. There was nobody in Ms. Stewart's department, if it was so critical to highway safety and traffic safety, nobody in the state transportation department, nobody in highway safety had it. And not one single employee of the incumbent had it, other than the business partner who was writing the RFP. That's important. The other eligibility requirement is you had to have an existing business relationship with the Maine Principals Association. Under sworn testimony, the executive director of the Maine Principals Association testified there was only one company currently that had a contractual relationship with the Maine Principals Association. That was ASM. Another requirement that only one company in the world could have qualified for this RFP. Also, what showed up during the RFP process is the state themselves and the RFP coordinator submitted a form that was in the documentation stating that she did a Google search. She checked Google search that resulted in 3 possible candidates for the RFP. one a digital company that had nothing to do with this type of work, I believe in Lewis and Auburn, and one a company in London, England that had nothing to do with this kind of work, and ASM. The other thing is we only found out about this RFP randomly. Nobody contacted us, nobody. So if we hadn't stumbled upon this RFP, it would have reflected a no bid situation for $4 or $5 million to the incumbent. And think about it, July 2020, there may have been 5,000 marketing, advertising, sports marketing agencies in North America. Not one other agency submitted for this RFP. And part of this has to do with, again, this isn't an indictment on the procurement process, but I understand, there were such precise technical requirements. You had to put an ad in the Kennebec Journal. So the state paid $327 to place a tiny ad in the Kennebec Journal for such a critical life-saving program. They didn't pursue due diligence. It wasn't done according to the director's comment, open and transparent. It was done intentionally for this program to go to, and I understand it. It's sort of human nature. If I work with a vendor for 10 years, I like them, I know their kids, I know we have a personal relationship. And if I was told I had to put it out to RFP, I, as a private company, may have leaned it that way. But the state is under a higher obligation. The procurement laws and regulations are higher than that. It's not up to the program manager to skew the program in this way. The problem also is in the state statute relative to the appeal, once it was determined that it was fundamentally unfair, there is no remedy. There was no, I'm sorry, Steve, you spent $10,000 participating in this. You've spent hundreds of hours, there is no remedy. I contacted the state after saying we want to be considered for this award. Our company, I believe on the merits, is the best candidate. The other element in the RFP that I think got glossed over a little bit, there was no cost guidance in the RFP. And I think you have it in front of you. We've participated in maybe thousands of RFPs. It's either how much is the hourly rate, how much is the budget, how much are the different elements. There was zero cost. So the fact that we were scored negatively because our cost guidance was a little bit higher than ASM's was a little bit absurd. And after I contacted the state, I asked them if we could be considered as a partner. The ultimate problem in this whole scenario with this type of RFP relative to procurement is whether it's a bias having to do with awarding a contract, or if this was an HR situation and there was a bias having to do with gender or race. If something is found out to be done wrong, if there's fundamentally something unfair that has happened, right now, the only mechanism is sort of a do-over. So the state can go, the Bureau of Highway Safety can say, okay, we're going to issue a new RFP. We're going to have the same people scoring it or different people. But if that bias exists and it's so profound and pronounced, it's easy to award it to the right. It's a subjective masked scoring system. So there's no telling in the combined scoring who scored what. And the idea that, I know that COVID wasn't in the RFP, but anyone in the universe issuing an RFP in the middle of a pandemic involving thousands of interactions with people, not to even talk about COVID, it was such a glaring admission. So both what was in the RFP and was omitted in the RFP pointed clearly and convincingly that the state wanted to award it to this one partner. And again, on a human nature level, I've used the same landscaping company for 10 years at my business. And if somebody told me I had to do an RFP, I would skew it that way. It would be equivalent to Chairman Libby, wanting to do something with Community Concepts Finance Corp. and then going, yeah, all bidders need to be in South Paris, Maine, or they need to offer free public Wi-Fi. And nobody could qualify. So it's not just that the award was flawed. The process from the beginning, it excluded thousands of potential bidders that could have provided services to the state. And, ultimately, I reject some of the classification about how critical traffic safety was. If you look at one of the attachment, it's an important program, but the majority of the program was table events at high schools and at public events where literature was being handed out. And then I also rejected in the appeal how Alliance Sports Marketing had unique and special sports marketing expertise. As a former owner of a pro NBA team, and as somebody who's done thousands of events and a former sports agent, and somebody who's worked in sports for 40 years, my company and I personally have lots of sports marketing work, but the state wasn't interested when they issued the RFP. They were not interested when they scored the RFP. And without being contentious, I totally disagree with Ms. Stewart's characterization where the eligibility thing was a mistake and they cleared it up in the question and answer phase. In the question and answer phase, we raised our hands and said, hey, state, you've asked for a requirement that nobody in the world has except this one guy in Nashville, Tennessee. Would you accept a DOT credential, a CDL? And they said, we'll accept it, but it is still a core scoring function. They had a chance to remedy the mistake. They didn't. They should have opened the RFP. And what I would like for the GOC and OPEGA to look into is the difference between the letter of the procurement law, which I know everyone's under burden, and I think the procurement department does a very good job. But there's a human element, there's a behavioral element. And if somebody wants to sort of game the system and show favoritism to a favored vendor, that can happen. But in this case, it was so egregious, not just in the points decided by the appeal. And to Jamie's point, if this represents 0.04%, so statistically, but how many other things like this haven't happened, but there hasn't been either a patella or an appellant or a petitioner that have pursued it. I've had the luxury of time and being able to focus on this. Most people would say, oh, we didn't want to pursue it. And for 5,000 agencies that were precluded to be part of the RFP, who's speaking for them? And ultimately, a big focus of this program is tens of thousands of teenage drivers here in Maine. And so without getting into the merits of what was a better choice for a vendor, because again, subjective, but the procurement process and procurement law and regulations in the state should protect these types of things. And if somebody is found, if a state employee is found to have such bias and such clear disregard for the intent of the procurement process, there should be some mechanism. And again, the pandemic's hard. We're all working from home, or many people are working from home. But right now, there is no remedy. I would still like to be considered a vendor for this program. I've had 3 teenage drivers grow up in Maine. I've run driver program. I think we're a great partner. But in reality, if we participate again and Ms. Stewart is running the department, what are the chances after going through what has to be an uncomfortable process? What are the chances that subjectively will be scored as the winning participant? Very low. So what I'm asking for OPEGA to do and for the GOC to do respectively is look at this, look at it as a case study, not as on a percentage base, because I don't think it's widespread, but come up with some new regulations. And in our particular case, I would love something. I would love a note from Ms. Stewart saying you'll be considered. I'd love for the commissioner of the Bureau to say, hey, it was a mistake. It was human error, but we respect your company. We respect your 100 employees. We respect your investment in the state. You'll be considered equally as a future participant. And with that, I want to thank everyone for your time and for allowing me to share my perspective. Thank you, Chairman Libby, and everyone else.
Thank you, Mr. Woods. Are there questions or comments from the committee for Mr. Woods? Seeing none, Ms. Coates has asked for a moment here. Is it a question or comment or a response?
No, I didn't know if it'd be appropriate to make a response on behalf of the department.
I mean, I think the committee is interested in clarifying information. I don't think the committee is interested in a back and forth
Right,
between the
understood.
parties who are on opposite sides of the issue. So if it's clarifying information for the committee, you're welcome to proceed.
So I was just going to make a brief statement just to say that, you know, at DPS, we do look to have an open and transparent process. We do look to follow the procurement process that Jamie laid out. And I think the director covered what happened in this case. But I did just want to get it out there that we are, of course, looking to follow a fair and open and transparent process. Thank you.
May I speak?
If it's clarifying information,
it is.
Yes.
Jamie, I'm sure, can offer clarifying information about the extent of the advertising of this project and the non-inclusion of COVID. I would like to clarify 2 points. One is that Mr. Woods has stated that there was no cost guidance, and that kind of threw off his response on the cost. And that is the very basis by which the award was invalidated. So from our perspective, the process worked. Number two, in terms of recovering money.
I'm sorry, Elaine, I didn't follow that point. Could you restate that?
Yeah. Mr. Woods stated that there was insufficient cost guidance and it caused him to have troubles responding to the cost component of the RFP. I think that I got that right, Mr. Woods. And one of the major basis for the invalidation of the award was the confusion over the cost, the way the cost was formulated or requested in the RFP. And that's why it is our position that the RFP process and the appeal process actually worked, because it did identify that cost had been an issue in this RFP, and thus the award was invalidated. The second clarification I'd like to offer on the fact that Mr. Woods is looking for or hoping for some sort of compensation for his time is that there are 4 answers to that. First is that responding to an RFP is a voluntary risk, and the RFP so states. It states that costs are not recoverable. It's in the very language of the RFP. Second, DAFS has no authority to do anything other than have an appeals panel look at this award and either validate it or invalidate it. There's no provision for costs. Third, DAFS does not have an appropriation for this purpose to deal with compensating appellants, even if they prevail. And fourth, we think that is for good reason, because if costs were recoverable, it could lead to encouragement of frivolous or non-meritorious appeals. And I'm not saying that would happen, but it could be an unintended consequence. And I'd like, if you don't mind, Jamie can talk about the advertising process, which is also pretty statutory, and also the reason COVID wasn't included, as it is not included in our RFPs.
I think we'll pause here for a moment. I think GOC has been given a lot of information to process, and I appreciate the remarks from Mr. Woods and the remarks from DAFS and DPS, but I think at this point, I'd just like to see if the committee is ready to move us in a direction here, and if folks have suggestions on whether we're going to proceed today with an action or carry this forward to our next meeting?
Do you want me to review the options or just let me know if you want?
Yeah, thank you, Lucia. I'm going to recognize Senator Bennett first.
Yeah, this is a tremendous amount of information. I've kind of just received the letter from DAFS even and missed it. So I've been reviewing it quickly. Also, Mr. Woods provided a lot of helpful information. I personally would benefit from a chance to digest this, hearing what we've heard already today. And so I think my bias would be to move in the direction of just maybe taking a pause on this and then revisiting it in our August meeting. And I'd like to just some thought. I'd like to think through, the options. I certainly wouldn't, I never mind Ms. Nixon giving us our options again to contemplate, but I think that I would want to contemplate them over a longer period of time than a couple of minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Bennett. I'm sort of feeling in a similar way. I'll recognize Lucia in a minute to review our options, but from a big picture sense, I think one of the challenges GOC has on this issue is we have a case study to evaluate, and our charge is to consider systemic problems in state government. So it's when we are presented with data that suggests that an appeal process is more or less functioning to invalidate improperly issued requests for proposals, the data suggests that the process that's been established is working. At the same time, we have a compelling case before us, and it's really that gray area of whether further analysis is appropriate here in this committee, or whether a committee like State and Local that has jurisdiction over procurement and DAFs might consider changes to statute in the next session. So I think that's one of the questions I'm trying to wrestle with. But Lucia, do you want to review our options for us?
Or, yeah, just quickly, and I was going to echo that with Senator Libby, just that focus that OPEGA, that one of your charges is to look at. Tend to look at individual complaints when they are indicative of systemic problems, but otherwise the focal attention of the committee is and has been on looking at overall systemic issues in state government. So on that note, yes, so your options, ultimately what you're deciding is whether to put this on the OPEGA work plan for an evaluation or a review with specific scope questions, or to put it on a standby list for potential future work. And those are really the decisions that you have at this point. You've collected quite a bit of information, has been mentioned. Or I guess also, as Senator Libby said, there is the option to refer it to another entity if you decide that perhaps mentioning state and local government would be a potential opportunity if you wanted to make some recommendations or referral to them to follow along. But with respect to OPEGA, it's really whether to charge us with undertaking a study. And I think when you get to that point, it would be also good to revisit the full suite of projects that you have on your plate and requested right now to look at the big picture.
Chairman, 10 seconds for context, please.
Thank you, Lucia. Mr. Woods, we are, I think we did make an exception to allow you to present evidence today. I gave you significant leave to make your case. I think we've got members of the committee who are weighing in at this point. We're leading to probably a delay of action. So with that, Representative McDonald, followed by Representative Dillingham.
Thank you. I will defer to Representative Dillingham, though. I'm interested to hear what she has to say.
Okay, Representative Dillingham.
Thank you very much, Representative McDonald. I think that I am going to say that I concur with Senator Bennett. There was a lot of information there, and I'm not even prepared to try to say which way we should go in without having some more time to kind of process and think about what was before us.
Thank you, Representative McDonald.
Thank you. So I am happy to have the opportunity to digest all of this information, but I will say that I am leaning towards not adding this to our work plan or standby list. While this is a single compelling case, I'm not seeing any evidence that this leads to a systemic problem throughout the system. And considering that our work is of a broader scope, I would consider referring this to committee if we had a directive to give them. But at this time, I'm really not leaning towards keeping this within GOC. Thank you.
Okay. I just want to note, in fairness to all involved here, we've had a pretty substantial discussion on this. I did stop DAFs and DPS from providing further comment, and I'm suggesting we do the same. Mr. Woods here, out of fairness to this committee, the work we have to continue this morning, but we do appreciate everyone joining us and providing quite a bit of information to us. So it seems like the committee is leaning towards keeping this on our unfinished business list, and we can move it forward to the August meeting for further deliberation, if that works for folks. Any objection to that any objection from committee members on that course of action? All right. Thanks everyone for joining us today. For GOC, we'll continue on our agenda, planning for upcoming meetings. I'll first turn it over to Lucia.
Thank you.
To quickly look at, give you a quick update on the work plan that you have in process. And let me share that quickly. Actually, I'll just do it verbally. So for your work plan, you just on a quick update, we obviously just went through and gave you the report on the referendum and citizens initiative and people's veto. And we also have for you we're working actively on finishing and drafting the seed evaluation of the seed investment tax credit. And that is slated to come to you in August, at which point we'll also have the hearing on the report just presented. We're moving along on the indigency determination part of the Maine Commission on Indigent Legal Services project that was left. We have, as things are starting to get freed up, ready to get people started looking at the follow-up survey of frontline workers in child protection. And actively underway on the evaluation of the rehab for historic properties tax credit and the research expense tax credit, and the expedited tax reviews for this year. And I think that the other, just quickly, in addition to this one that you have just been discussing this morning, the other evaluation requests that are hanging out there are the Wild Blueberry Commission, which is sort of on hold for now, and the Workday Maine request. So those two are also out there on your current request list. And we have been tracking legislation. And I think once things are in a final disposition, we can let you know where things land that are relevant to current or recent reviews.
Thank you. I brought us to the wrong part of the agenda, but Lucia correctly kept us on track. So we were on reports from director. Senator Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just in talking about moving forward, I wanted to discuss and ask about, I am horrified, as I'm sure most of you are, these reports of now 4 children who have died in the month of June. And I know I read in the paper that now the department is seeking an evaluation from the Casey Foundation. I'm just wondering, where is GOC at in terms of having a report from the department, from Dr. Landry, and how that fits into, now what is currently happening in real time?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator. As members know, the co-chairs work with the OPEGA staff to develop the schedule for our meetings, and we had penciled in for ourselves a mid-year report back from the Child Welfare Ombudsman. We typically, since we've been engaged in this work of oversight over child protective services, have heard from the Ombudsman on an annual basis. The report from January, I think, was fairly concerning. And I know there have been lots of conversations between the various offices and advocates to try to get a handle on things, but I had felt we'd like to have a mid-year update. And that was before reading any of the news of the last 4 weeks. So obviously the ground has shifted quite a bit. And under planning for upcoming meetings, I was going to suggest that our committee meets in July, which is typically a month off for us. But our committee meet in July. I would like to hear from Dr. Landry and OCFS. I would like to hear from the Child Welfare Ombudsman. I'm also considering an ask of the Attorney General, as well as a representative from the judicial branch. So we're moving ahead a bit in the agenda, which is fine. But that was going to be my proposal to this group, is to have us come together. And I was looking at Wednesday, July 14th, as that opportunity to bring us together. So Representative McDonald.
Thank you. So Senator Libby and I did have a brief conversation this morning about having a July meeting and the need for it, given the circumstances. And I just wanted to add that July 14th, I am available. And if we could have, I unfortunately have another meeting starting soon. And so I would like to move to the portion of our agenda where we discuss whether or not we will be remaining on Zoom or whether we would like to meet in person as a committee.
Sure. Thank you, Representative McDonald. I am favorable to resuming in-person meetings. Obviously, there are benefits to the remote format. There are also challenges, and everybody's aware of them. So I'm putting on the table that, my proposal for the next meeting is July 14th, and I am open to that being in person at the GOC committee room. I would welcome comments from any other members of the committee. Senator Bennett.
Thank you. I am in favor of both of those suggestions.
Thank you, Senator Bennett. Any concern with either of those suggestions, July 14th and the resumption, is that a word, resumption? Resuming in-person meetings. Representative Arata.
Thank you. Would a hybrid meeting be possible? Sort of a Zoom or in-person hybrid? Is that an option? And I can't be there on the 14th, but that's okay. As long as the rest of you can, I trust you all to ask good questions.
We can certainly have our staff.
We can look into it. Yeah, the all in person or all Zoom is very doable. The hybrids are a lot more complicated. I know it sounds like it should be easy. The appropriations room is set up for that. I'm not sure if there's any other spaces in the building that are set up for that. So I can talk to the chairs and see how you want to proceed. They're going to be working towards that for next year, but we're not quite there yet.
Thank you, Lisha. I do recall being in AFA last year for a committee meeting with a hybrid format. So perhaps that's an option that can be explored. Representative McDonald.
And then just a final point to bring up, I would like to move our meetings to 10 a.m. rather than 9 a.m. due to childcare restrictions or concerns on my behalf.
Give folks who are traveling a bit farther than I am a little bit more time to get to the building. I think that's appropriate. So it sounds like we're settled that for 10 a.m. on July 14th, staff will explore a hybrid option for folks who are unable to be present at the Capitol, but I think all of us probably are intending to be there if we're able to. So I appreciate that. let's see, we've kind of jumped right into planning for upcoming meetings. Lucia, you touched on this some, but we will have public comment committee work session on the Maine Citizen Initiative People's Veto process. I don't think that will be,
Did you
well, I
want?
defer to you for July or August.
Well, so that's my question. Because since you weren't planning to meet in August, I mean, you weren't planning to meet in July, we scheduled it for August, but we could decide this right now, or we could talk about it after, whether you want to add that to whether you want the July 14th meeting just focused on child welfare, or whether you'd like to I see some heads shaking. So take the pulse of that and figure out, we can do whatever you want, whether we have it on, I think, the 14th or in August.
Thank you, Representative McDonald.
So my preference is to keep the July meeting focused on child welfare.
Seeing head nods for that. So that will be our plan. Chairs will work with staff to map out the August meetings with public hearing and public comments and work session on the reports we received today. We will have the seed capital presentation probably in that August meeting as well. Is that correct, Lucia? Okay.
Yep.
Great. I think we've wrapped up our business today, unless there's anything else staff or members would like to raise at this time. Appreciate everyone hanging with us. If there are no other comments, say have a wonderful, safe weekend. We'll see you all back at the Capitol next week.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.